Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Monday, everyone. I'm Meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 24th of February. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with the latest watches, warnings, and advisories. I'll give you a hint, though. At this moment, there are none, except for some of the marine areas. You can always go to our website at weather.gov/Alaska or www.arh.noaa.gov. Give us a call on the weather info line at 800-472-0391. Find each Weather Service office around the nation on Twitter, on Facebook on U.S. National Weather Service Alaska, if you're checking out the information in the news feed from our own state, and of course on YouTube during the afternoon. You get your daily afternoon map briefing at NWS Anchorage, and of course after the show is over into the evening hours, if you go to alaskapublic.org, you can find this complete broadcast online, or go back to YouTube and search for AKWX TV. Go ahead and subscribe to that while you're there, and you'll always know when the latest version of this show is available online. So lots of ways to get Alaska weather. Here's a look at the Bering Sea satellite picture. A couple areas of low pressure. You can probably find those fairly quickly since you're used to looking at this with me. Low pressure here south of the Alaska Peninsula and also across the western parts of the Bering Sea and over the western chain. This is bringing snow to Shemya, and it's also pumping in a lot of warm and wet air, but a pretty narrow band of that moisture, again, working up the west coast, bringing pockets of mixed precipitation, maybe some ice pellets, freezing rain around Cape Newingham and points north, and all the way up into the western tip of the Seward Peninsula. It's also slowing the progression of the ice from dropping southward, as you would imagine, with a more east and southeasterly flow working across that ice edge. Instead of that dropping within 50 nautical miles now, it's a little bit over 100 nautical miles from St. Paul. So some changes out there in the sea ice conditions, and we'll take a look at that in just a bit. As we look at the infrared satellite picture across a large part of Alaska, all this grayish area here is actually a clear sky. It was a very clear bluebird kind of day across a large part of Alaska, southeast, clear, breezy, even gusty at times across some parts of Stevens Passage. Across south central, nothing but blue sky looked like today. The interior looked clear. Most of the Arctic coast saw at least a partly to mostly sunny type day. And out to the west, well, here's our band of moisture working up the west coast with occasional snow showers, rain showers, and maybe a little bit of ice, and sleet, and rain and snow mixed in together. Let's put this into motion, and you can see how this moisture stream really isn't connected to any major source or all the way connected to the tropics at this point, like we've seen in the past. That's good news. That means we're not going to have a wealth of moisture, at least not yet. We're watching the clouds building across the central and southern parts of the Gulf, and as we get into Tuesday and Wednesday, we're going to watch how this moisture works its way up across the Gulf and see how far north it gets, because what we're dealing with here is a pretty stable ridge of high pressure that's keeping things cool, dry, and stable. As a result, it's going to make it harder for that moisture to work all the way into that and take over. So a lot of things will have to change, but this is the next change that we're seeing coming into the Gulf, and several other areas of low pressure will help to work that northward slowly and surely, and perhaps erode high pressure, at least in some ways. We'll have to see how that works out in midweek. Right now, today's weather map shows high pressure in charge from British Columbia through the Yukon and into the interior. There's a weak area of low pressure just on the lee side of the Alaska Range, in this case the north side, and that's producing some light Chinook winds, let's say. Gusts there probably on the order of 35, maybe 40 miles per hour, so not the strongest gusts you've seen in a while. Areas along the Arctic coast also experiencing some occasionally gusty winds. Wouldn't be surprised to see a few flurries from time to time in the low deck of clouds, but really most of the activities here across the west coast from Kodiak Island to the western Capes and all the way up to the western tip of the Seward Peninsula. We saw some snow around Unalaska and Dutch Harbor today, and also around Shemya. And like I said, several other waves of low pressure are situated to the south. High pressure still in charge tonight. That should keep the sky mostly clear across most parts of south central, southeast, and the interior, maybe a few areas of valley fog. Across the west, scattered snow showers will be back. Rain and snow continues for Kodiak and also across the eastern parts of the chain with snow showers out in the west. A frontal boundary lies across the Arctic coast and into the Yukon on the north and east side of the ridge, keeping the coldest weather out of Alaska. For Tuesday, light snow will be possible from Kotzebue Sound and across the Bering Strait. Probably some gusty winds in this region as well. Out across the YK Delta, more areas of light snow. And rain and snow may mix from Kodiak Island through the Alaska Peninsula and probably west of Sand Point. We're expecting some stronger winds here too. Notice how the packing of those contours is pretty tight right here. Through Shelikof Strait, storm force winds should be expected in this region, as you'll see tonight, and also across Cape Sarachev and points west through the Shumagon Islands. So do expect some areas of probably some stronger winds all the way through the eastern chain up to the Shelikof Strait region. Now, warmer air is also working northward, so with this, once this passes your area, you'll probably have a better chance for rain showers. Notice that southeast, though, is just getting grazed by this. Probably still dealing with some gusty winds, especially through the inner channels here. High pressure is in charge of your weather, with low pressure just kind of flirting with the periphery or the edge of that, so a little bit more of a gust through southeast at times, but it looks like mostly dry weather should prevail for you. Out across the west, snow showers and periods of rain mixed with snow across the chain that should be kind of passing through. So with one disturbance pass through the western chain, you may still see some light snow in Shemya, but the winds do not look to be terrible at all. As we get into Wednesday, south and west of Kodiak, you see a 975 millibar low. Colder air swinging south of that and drying out there, so probably some gap winds through some of the eastern parts of the chain, and then stronger southeasterly winds developing and moving into Bristol Bay. That likely creates rainfall across southwestern Alaska. Periods of rain and snow will start to develop as some of that warmer air works in and over that cold air. There could be some mixed precipitation, maybe some freezing rain in that area. We'll see how far north that goes, but it is possible that some of that could work its way farther up into the interior and the west coast. Across south central, again, we're going to be struggling with the leftovers of high pressure across the Yukon. Some of this will still be in charge of south central, so we may see a little bit more of a breeze than any wet weather or snowy weather across south central, including the Anchorage Bowl and the Matanuska-Susitna valleys. Prince William Sound will likely be dealing with rain and snow. The lower terrain of the coastal areas most likely liquid precipitation, and southeast still dry. How about that? You'll start to see a few more clouds working up the coastline, but warmer air probably just offshore will bring some rainfall to areas a little bit more in the Gulf. Probably not so much on land. Right now things look pretty dry for you. Now a wide area of snow is expected across parts of the Bering Sea. Most of that will be limited to areas offshore, but you can see the rain and snow really starting to take over the central and southern parts of the Bering. And a frontal boundary continues across the Arctic coast, keeping some dry air across the coastal plain itself, while areas right along the coast will be dealing with a little bit better chance for a partly to mostly cloudy type day. Maybe some flurries, but probably not any sizable amounts of snow, and thankfully probably not too much wind. Here's a look at temperatures then across southeast today, lower to mid 30s across most of the southeastern panhandle. 37 in Juneau, 36 degrees as you head out toward places a little bit farther south toward Annette and Ketchikan is even closer to 40 degrees there. Hyder 34, Petersburg about 34 degrees, and Haines and Skyway lower 30s there. Yakutat 36, Whitehorse about 7 degrees today. Prince William Sound 20s and 30s. Cordova is 26. Middleton Island showing 37, and you can see the warmth also hovering around the southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula. Homer and Seward both in the upper 30s. In fact, I believe Homer today made it to about 40 degrees for the high. Kodiak Island 37 degrees. Talkeetna 21. About 27 in Anchorage, 0 in Glen Allen. Farther north, Fairbanks was looking at low teens there. Greeley and Delta Junction closer to 18. 17 in Northway. Eagle also about 17. Fort Yukon 8 below, 0 in Arctic Village, 7 above in Anaktuvuk Pass. And you can see Prudhoe Bay, Deadhorse a little bit colder there at 11 below. Kaktovik, Barrow, many other areas including Wainwright a little bit closer to the 0 degree mark, if not right on it. Teens and 20s for the Kotzebue Sound region. Kotzebue 16, 21 in Kivalina, 18 in Shishmaref, and 24 in Nome today. Across the Norton Sound region, mid to upper 20s, 34 in St. Lawrence Island. Bethel warmed up to 40 degrees today. McGrath was at 13. Areas around Grayling closer to 18 degrees. King Salmon, Bristol Bay in the upper 30s to lower 40s. Sparrowvine also fairly mild. Mid 30s for the Alaska Peninsula, including Sandpoint, closer to 40 degrees. On Alaska Dutch Harbor at 36. Mid 30s for the Pribilovs, and also for Adak and Atka with Shemya only at 28. Overnight low temperatures then stay at or above freezing for most of the chain. Lower 30s for Kodiak Island, Southwest, upper 20s to lower 30s. Norton Sound temperatures in the teens with Nome at 15, St. Lawrence Island low 20s. The Arctic coast should see lows in anywhere from 5 below to 20 below. The farther east you go, the colder it gets. And for the interior, temperatures could range from 25 below or so around Fairbanks to about 35, maybe even 40 below around Fort Yukon. For Northway and Eagle, expect temps anywhere from 7 below at Eagle to 31 below in Northway, so some severe cold there in the upper part of the valley, and anywhere from 15 to 25 below across the Copper River Basin. For South Central, teens and 20s there, 32 in Kodiak, and teens and 20s for most of Southeast, continuing your cold run there with highs tomorrow in the upper 30s and lower 40s. You'll get your sun back. And lower 30s across South Central. 5 above for Glen Allen, 13 above in Fairbanks. So you can see the warmth spreading northward again. Bettles and Ambler likely in the single digits and teens. 12 above in Anaktuvuk Pass, getting warmer even farther north still, and 2 below in Barrow, with Kotzebue looking at 17 above, 25 above in Nome, and south and west in the 20s and 30s, with the chain also in the mid-30s tomorrow. Flying weather, as you would expect, the interior should be severe clear. It looks like a beautiful day to fly. There will be some turbulence issues in the west, but we're not quite there yet. IFR conditions across the Gulf and across some parts of the western Bering, but a wide area of MVFR should be expected there and across areas just offshore of the Arctic coast. Other than that, smooth sailing and clear skies. Anaktuvuk Pass and Adigan Pass, both expected to be VFR. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass should see improving conditions after starting out with a little bit of MVFR in the morning. Rainy Pass also expected to be visual. Windy Pass should be VFR. Isabel Pass, as we saw, visual flight rule there, and for Mentasta Pass and Tanita Pass. VFR there for Portage too, and for Chilkoot and White Pass. Mind the wind chill, but again, should be clear sailing. Here's a look at the freezing levels, and if you've been looking at the upper level weather pattern, this isn't a surprise. There's a bubble of high pressure here that's cutting itself off from the upper level wind flow, the jet stream here well to our south. So we've got a bubble of warmer air here aloft all the way up to 8,000 feet before you find the freezing levels there just across the border and right over, well, about Old Crow in northern parts of Yukon. And then 2 to 8,000 foot freezing lines there across the Gulf of Alaska with the surface freezing level draped across the Alaska Peninsula and even north of the Pribilovs out there in the Bering Sea. So warm weather for sure. Icing potential below 16 and above 6 across a large part of the Gulf. Otherwise light to isolated moderate across southwest and Kodiak and across some parts of the southern areas of southeast. Probably looking at some rime there in most areas. If we get some freezing rain though, of course, there's going to be more of a severe clear icing threat here across areas around Norton Sound, probably in the south and western parts of the YK. So keep your eye on that. That'll probably be more of a threat as we get into Tuesday night and Wednesday. The jet stream right now shows high pressure really pushing northward. We really have kind of a cutoff high situated right about here tomorrow morning. Other than that, the main core of the jet stream is well to our south. You can see the trough digging in from the Kamchatka Peninsula all the way into the north parts of the Pacific. And then we get into that southerly flow snaking its way up the west coast. So it's really focusing that moisture channel right here across the west coast of Alaska. And then we're sending our friends in the lower 48 and the Canadian provinces all of that cold that we would normally be dealing with a little bit closer to home. So really shunting that off and pushing that east. So again, expect complaints and comparisons to follow suit as we head through the rest of the week. High pressure sitting across the Copper River Basin and the eastern interior, explaining why we have that really big cold burst right there over Northway tomorrow. As you saw, a southeasterly flow constricted across the Kodiak Island, south central and southwest. Wind speeds anywhere from 30 to about 60 knots or so, and then the pattern gets a little messier as you head out toward the chain. More of a westerly flow running along the Aleutians, about 10 to 40 knots on the Pacific side and 15 to 40 knots on the north side of that trough. Looking at 3,000 feet, now the pattern's a little bit different. You have a little bit more of an influence already from low pressure here across the southern Gulf, 50 to 60 knots or so, still coming in from the east and southeast. Wind speeds range pretty quickly from 20 to 50 knots over southeastern Alaska. And then you see the return flow, the southerly winds working through the Bering Strait, only about 15 to 20 knots or so, but that's enough to work up the warmer air across the Bering Strait and into the Arctic coast. Turbulence potential generally below 6,000 feet across south central, southwest, and southeastern Alaska. We expect some of the worst turbulence tomorrow, probably across south central and across the peninsula and Kodiak Island. You may find some chop, especially with gap winds and low-level wind shear across parts of southeast. Watch those areas in the inner channels as you would expect. You know the trouble spots. They could be back tomorrow. And below 4,000 feet across the Arctic coast, look for some light to isolated moderate chop there along that frontal boundary. Other than that, should be pretty smooth sailing and clear sailing across a large part of the interior tomorrow. And in parts of south central, at least the sky will be clear, but you might have to hold on to the yoke just a little bit extra. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with a look at the ice edge and your marine weather here in just a few minutes.
Good evening. I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation and Alaska Public Media, welcome back to Hangar Flying. Tonight we've got John Henry on. John was on last time and started a very interesting and educational story about flying his Cessna 185 when the engine quit on him. John is a CFI. He's a MEI, private commercial instrument, but he wasn't a professional aviator, but he certainly had his ratings and he certainly did the right thing in this particular case. I want to pick it up there. John, welcome back.
Well, thank you. Glad to be here.
So about 1,500 feet,
Mm-hmm.
engine failed, probably the crankshaft failed. You and your dad, you looked around and your dad actually spotted a place that you could probably put it down on the road. And just recalling what you said last time, you knew what that sight picture looked like, and you reverted back to what you had practiced over and over and over. And one of the things I thought was interesting was that you had the presence of mind to switch your transponder to 7700.
Mm-hmm.
And so talk about the sensation of what was the sync rate like? Noticeably different, or did you even notice?
I didn't even notice. After the bang and we realized that the plane wasn't going to run anymore, the prop kept going, the loud, it just fly the airplane. I just flew the airplane. I know what the attitude looks like flying along a normal flight and what it looks like in a glide and so on and so forth. So I didn't have any problems doing that. Even the airspeed wasn't all that important at the time. You'd check it briefly and just make sure you're within the glide's parameters. I believe it's between 65 and 75 on a 185, but the sight picture told me more of what I was doing and where I was going and how I was going to get there over anything.
Talk a little bit about your pickup.
My pickup?
Yeah, who came to pick you up?
Oh, Mike Patterson, actually. Mad Mike from the engine overhauler. He was out there. I called him up and I told him it must have been 11:30 that night. I said, I'm out here on this road. I don't know exactly where I'm at, but if I could get you to come pick me up. and he did. He came out, pulled the prop through and said, yep, broken crankshaft.
So when you practice, well, let me ask you a couple of questions. Would you have done anything different?
No, I wouldn't have. I did put my flaps on initially when I turned my base, and then I realized this isn't going to work, so I actually brought my flaps back up and proceeded on down, and then I used my flaps as I got in closer, and my sight picture was changing and things like that just to maintain that. I just concentrate on that, getting around the corner and getting on the straight stretch.
So you touched down with some measure of flaps.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
oh yeah.
yeah.
Oh yeah, I had them all in. When it was all said and done, I had them all in.
Now, when you're still flying your 185, right?
Yes.
Now, when you practice a simulated engine out situation, or let me ask you a different question. When you fly a normal pattern in your 185, let's say at Birchwood or wherever, Wasilla, wherever, do you, when you come off the perch on base, like, do you pull the power to idle, or do you carry a little power?
No, I'm always carrying power. I always carry some power. I bring it back I probably carry about 2,000 RPMs, maybe 15 to 2,000, and then it's all in the picture and then working the throttle and the flaps and things like that. The objective is to be able to gradually reduce your power and not have any power in when you touch the ground. without having to push it back.
And you
in.
push your props up before
Yes,
landing.
yes,
Yeah.
I do.
And okay.
I just concentrated on that sight picture, that picture of that moving touchdown point. Is it coming towards me? Is it going away from me?
Do you do much off-airport stuff?
Yes, that's pretty much all I do. Going to my cabin and various places I like to go fishing.
And what do you land on?
I land on gravel bars, anything I think that's hard enough that I can put my 185 down on.
Right. I mean, you've described it very well, and my hat's off to you. Congratulations for some great airmanship. Any last-minute words of advice for maybe someone who finds himself in the same situation?
I think people just need to practice. They need to know their airplane, and they need to execute what they know. And what I mean by that is everybody knows how to fly, everybody knows how to do all these things, but practice and proficiency will determine how well you execute that.
Okay, one last question. We're just about out of time, but understand you use a checklist.
Yes, I do. I call it my killer checklist. I got the idea from a friend of mine. And I've got, I think, 6 items on there, and they all relate to the pre-takeoff. And I actually point and use each item, mention each item and check each item. And they're the ones that keep me out of trouble on a departure.
Good for you. Appreciate you being on the show tonight.
Great, thank you.
I want to tell you that the Safety Foundation, since the fall safety seminar, really has been emphasizing the positive, and you certainly in this case did the right things, and were able to walk away from it. So my hat's off to you. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. I hope this information helps.
Oh, I'm sure there's people out there listening, and maybe someday someone will get to use some of the things that you've said. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed tonight's program. And you know, if you've ever heard something on this program that made you make a decision or helped you make a decision and do something better, let us know, because that's real feedback. And until next time, as always, fly safe.
Here's a look at today's sea ice edge as analyzed by our program experts at the Sea Ice Program here in Anchorage. It covers all of the Bering and the Arctic coast and Cook Inlet for that matter. Looking at the ice edge, you can do so anytime you want by going to pafc.arh.noaa.gov/ice.php. That's a mouthful, but it'll get you to the tools that you need to create an image like this. And about 3 or 4 days ago, we were talking about the ice edge being fairly close to St. Paul. It was within about 50 nautical miles, and I know I've moved the map around a little bit, so if you're looking at a one-to-one picture from the last picture we had to this one, probably looks like it's still close. But I measured this today and looked over the ice program's analysis. This is about 100 nautical miles or so, and the beginning of this, of course, is ice strip, so it's not a solid ice sheet, not until you get up into here. So we're looking at the ice edge, or the leading edge of that ice anyway, has moved northward once again thanks to that easterly flow really eroding away that leading edge. So some improvements there. If you're in St. Paul going, oh, I see ice, it's moved north a little bit there over where we were just a few days ago. We're still looking at ice there in the Cook Inlet as well. Some of that also just outside of Kenai has been eroded there. You can see some open water right there. Like I said, anytime you want, you can check out the ice edge analysis and the outlook by going to weather.gov/Alaska and then look for Ice Desk on the left-hand side of your screen. In southeast, we're still talking about some gusty winds in the inner channel. Some of those could be reaching up to 45, even 55 knots there, so watch for some stronger gusts across the inner channels there. Otherwise, the north and northeasterly flow, 20 to 25 knots, freezing spray in the Lynn Canal, and an offshore flow ranging from 15 to 25 knots from north to south, and seas anywhere from 6 to as high as 10 or 11 feet. You'll see the seas come up a little bit more on Wednesdays. We maintain that offshore flow. Winds in the inner channel is pretty much the same, 20 to 25 knots, and seas running about 4 to 5 feet midweek. As we get into south central, a north and easterly flow will be the strongest across Shelikof Strait, with storm warnings there tonight and again tomorrow. Higher gusts should be expected on either end of Kodiak Island. 19-foot seas inside Shelikof Strait, 17-foot seas across the western Gulf, 10 to even 8-foot seas as you get up toward Prince William Sound. A light northerly flow on the inside and across Cook Inlet there in the ice-free waters. 4-foot seas on the north end. That increases to 5 feet as we head into Wednesday. The winds diminish across areas near the Barren Islands and into Shelikof Strait. We're still looking at an east to westerly flow coming into Cook Inlet and over Kodiak Island around 35 knots, and winds are picking up across Prince William Sound, now up to 15 knots as we head into Wednesday. For the Alaska Peninsula, a north and easterly flow also increasing throughout the day, anywhere from 25 knots in the morning to as high as 45 knots as you get into the afternoon, with higher gusts and seas coming up to 17 feet. By Wednesday, the winds are diminishing, an east and northeasterly flow on the Pacific side, 14 to 19 foot seas there, and 8 to 9 foot seas there on the Bering Sea side, 35 knots inside of Bristol Bay. Across the Aleutians, again, kind of a messy flow here as we've got a number of weather systems interacting with the wind. A variable flow north of Nikolsky, a northwesterly flow on the south side, easterlies across the eastern parts of the chain at 30 knots with 8 foot seas on the Bering side, 11 foot seas on the Pacific side, and west and southwesterly winds around Kiska and Attu at 20 knots. By Wednesday, westerlies are trying to take back over. We still have a northwesterly colder flow from Nikolsky and Unalaska at 25 to 30 knots. 8 to 9 foot seas on the Bering side and 13 foot seas on the Pacific side, and seas across the west and central parts of the chain anywhere from 6 to as high as 9 feet. Across the west coast, northeasterly winds coming into low pressure here, so we've got 25 to 30 knots on the northern end, 20 knots around the Pribilofs there with the northerly flow, and 7 foot seas. Those offshore winds again helping to keep that leading edge of the ice from moving any further south at this point. 10 to 15 knots around Nunivak Island, and 25 knots from the east across St. Paul and St. George with an 8 foot sea. Across the Arctic coast, 10 to 25 knots should do the trick there. More of a east to westerly flow across the north slope, and then more of a southerly flow coming up through the Bering Strait at 15 knots. By Wednesday, that reverses course, and north and northeasterly winds will rule the day. 25 knots inside of Kotzebue Sound, and more of a southwest and westerly flow. Light, 10 to 15 knots on Wednesday for areas like Barrow, Kaktovik, and Prudhoe Bay. Recapping tonight's weather warnings and watches, there are none. Things are relatively quiet across most of Alaska tonight, with the exception of a storm warning there in Shelikof Strait. High pressures in charge. Clear, dry skies for many in the interior, southeast, and south central, with cloud cover and occasional snow and rain showers, maybe even mixed in between across the west coast. Look for a rain-snow mix in south or eastern parts of the chain and across the western parts of the Aleutians. And things are back in play again tomorrow with the warmer air trying to work through the Gulf. Periods of rain and snow may mix across the Alaska Peninsula. Southeast stays dry but breezy, and snow showers across the Seward Peninsula. And clouds begin to work back into the interior as we head into midweek. Southeast still looks dry. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.
Cook Inlet Tug and Barge is a marine transportation company specializing in harbor services with a primary marketing focus on the Port of Anchorage, providing their customers with quality-based service specifically tailored to their needs.